me please welcome on stage Rasa Juknavičienė, who is chair of the European Parliament's Subcommittee on Defense and a former Lithuanian defense minister. Rasa, please sit next to me. Commissioner Thierry Breton, who is responsible for the internal market brief, including defense. Welcome, Commissioner. Alessandro Profumo, who is CEO of Leonardo, the global defense contractor. Please welcome. And Mircea Geana, NATO Deputy Secretary General. Welcome. So, given the time is short, let's just jump right in. Rasa, I would like to ask you to give us a bit of a sense of where we're at. The European Parliament has been calling for a renegotiation of the budget, arguing that it's not fit to deal with these challenges of today, including, obviously, Putin's war in Ukraine. But can you tell us a bit, why do you think that the EU should be spending big on defense and security? What is the added value? Why should member states go through the budget at all?
First of all, thank you for the invitation. My first time to discuss EU budget in my lifetime. I am not specialist, but working more on security, defense issues, but not directly related to the budgets. But it's a very important one. I decided to switch into Lithuanian because I heard you have translation into my mother tongue, and I respect the work of interpreters. I think it would be nice to have them listening. Šiuo metu, kai mes kalbam apie šį svarbų momentą, kaip jau minėjo ir komisijos pirmininkė Ursula von der Leyen, nėra turbūt geresnės dienos apie tai susimastyti. Šį rytą Ukraina buvo atakuota labai stipriai, Kijevo centras, energetikos centrai. Ir tai yra Putino konvulsijos, paskutinis etapas šio karo. Ir atsakant į jūsų klausimą, mums labai svarbu dabar suprasti du dalykus. Šito laikotarpio etapas ir strategiškai žiūrint į ateitį Europos Sąjungos. Dėl pirmo yra visiškai aišku. Mes turim padėti Ukrainai laimėti šitą karą. Europos Sąjunga padarė daug, tačiau dėja, jeigu pasižiūrėtumėm iš ukrainiečių matymo, arba net ir iš mano šalies matymo, tai Europos Sąjunga nebuvo ta svarbiausia žaidėja, kuri padėjo Ukrainai, kaip sakyti, persilaužti. Ir Europos Sąjunga pasirodė nepasiruošusi tokio masto konvenciniam atakom Europos kontinente. Jungtinės Amerikos valstijos ir Didžioji Britanija, ypač Jungtinės Amerikos valstijos, buvo pagrindinis žaidėjas. Dėl strateginių krypčių, kodėl mums reikia, aš esu visiškai įsitikinusi, kad mums reikia žymiai labiau rūpinti saugumu, tiek mūsų valstybių viduje, tiek ir Europos Sąjungos mastu, bet turim turėti omeny jau kitokią Europos Sąjungą. Ukrainai laimėjus šį karą, Ukrainos kariuomenė tampa pačia stipriausia Europos kontinento kariuomenė. Ir tikrai aš dar sulauksiu laiko, kai Ukrainos kariai mokys kai kurių Europos Sąjungos valstybių kariuomenės. Ir kalbėdami apie investicijas, kalbėdami apie mūsų strategiškumą, mes turime matyti jau ir apie šitą faktorių, kuris bus svarbiausias ginant Europos Sąjungos rytinį flangą. Taigi, kokia bus Europos Sąjungos politika? Visų pirma, reikia nustatyti, aišku, tikslus ir grėsmės. Aš, pavyzdžiui, matau vėlgi, kad ar mano gyvenime Rusija bus kitokia. Ir šiandien vykstantis karas yra karas taip pat dėl kitokios Rusijos. Ar Europos Sąjungoje visi tą vienodai suprantam? Turbūt ne. Aš manau, kad niekas, turbūt visi supranta, kad su Putinu nebegalės būti business as usual. Bet ar bus business as usual su vėl kokia nors teroristiniu režimu, čia irgi mums šiandien svarbus klausimas. Taigi, aš esu už tai, kad tiek ES lygių, tiek valstybių narių lygių gynybos biudžetai turi būti žymiai kitokie. Mes per daug atsipalaidavom, per daug įsivaizdavom, kad iš tikrųjų karai baigėsi. Tai buvo didžiulė klaida neinvestuoti į saugumą, taip kaip ir investuoti į Putino režimą, mąstant, kad galimas tas engagement. Tai dabar šitų klaidų pasimokius, mes turim visiškai permastyti savo strategiją. Visi tie planai, kurie buvo iki šiol, jie turi būti peržiūrėti ir lygiai taip pat su saugumo politika, įskaitant ir mūsų žmonių parengimą įvairiom galimom grėsmėm. Aš bijau, mano paskutinė tezė, aš bijau, kad kalbėdami apie galingus ginklus, mes pamirštam vieną svarbų dalyką, tai mūsų žmonių motyvacija. Aš nesu tikra, ar visose ES šalyse žmonės būtų turėję tokią motivaciją kautis, atrodytų visiškai beviltiškai beveik situacijoje už savo valstybę, kaip tai parodė mums ukrainiečiai.
Thank you for that. I'm going to turn next to Commissioner Breton. If we jump slightly back in time, the Commission launched this term, strategic autonomy, and in particular, you were an advocate of it, which today seems to have gained in focus and in importance, but there's been a lot of the debate of what is strategic autonomy, especially in the defense context. So, since we have you here, could you clarify once and for all what strategic autonomy, what does it mean when you translate it into policy, including in the budget for Europe? Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me here today. Thank you, Gio, for this day today. That's extremely important to discuss the budget of our Commission. Unfortunately, I will not be able to answer to your question, so I know that you will be very sorry. Strategic autonomy is something that I'm using myself very cautiously. Because, of course, when you go in your country, strategic autonomy has a specific meaning, and especially because of your neighbor and because of your past. When you go to Italy, it's another one. When you go to Greece, it's a third one. When you go to France, it's another one. To Germany, another one. In other words, we have to be always very careful with words. And that's always why I prefer, I know that it's using, some say strategic autonomy, some say open strategic autonomy. For me, what is important is that behind these words, we are able to monitor our future. And that we, as much as we can, depend on ourselves. Of course, with all the alliances around us. That's extremely important. That's extremely important. But we learn the hard way that in crisis, and by the way, we had to cope with many crises since the past few years. We learn that we have been able to cope with the crisis because of our capacity to produce what was needed, remember the vaccines, and because of our solidarity. But of course, it doesn't mean that we do everything on our own. Of course, we do this with allies. But to have allies, you need to be strong somewhere. That's why I will always say that strategic autonomy, if you want, is to understand where we are strong. And by the way, where we are strong, I learned in my life that it's always better to be even stronger. And then what you can share with your partners and allies. Si vous voulez, maintenant, je vais parler en français parce que j'ai vu que vous avez ouvert le bal en français, dans votre langue maternelle. So, comme vous, je vais utiliser peut-être les interprètes pour dire que, en fait, cette guerre en Ukraine a réveillé de façon très brutale le besoin pour nous d'accroître nos efforts de défense. On se connaît depuis un certain temps maintenant. Et vous savez que depuis bien longtemps, avant même que je sois commissaire, j'appelais moi-même de là où j'étais, maintenant évidemment en tant que commissaire, l'ensemble des États membres à accroître leurs efforts de défense. On a vu les chiffres, on vient de réaliser que c'est vraiment insuffisant. Je vais vous donner quelques chiffres, si vous le permettez. Chaque État membre, au fond, devait investir au moins 2% de son PIB en défense. C'était l'engagement que nous avions, en tout cas tous les membres de l'OTAN, et au-delà, c'était évidemment ce qui était recommandé. Et on sait que, hélas, malgré nos demandes répétées, ça n'a pas été le cas. Si jamais nous avions dépensé ce qu'on devait dépenser, depuis 2000 par exemple, c'est 1300 milliards d'euros qu'on aurait investis en défense et qui n'ont pas été là. Et c'est vrai dans tous les pays, le vôtre, le mien, il n'y a qu'un pays qui a dépensé un peu plus que les 2%. C'est la Grèce. Tous les autres pays, celui qui a le moins dépensé, c'est l'Allemagne, moins 450 milliards qui manquent. Celui qui a le plus dépensé, c'est la Grèce, plus 30 milliards. Et on se situe entre les deux. Et on est en train de payer ça. Il ne faut pas se raconter l'histoire. Donc il faut rattraper très vite ce retard. Et pour le rattraper, on a commencé par faire, avant la guerre, à mettre un fonds européen de défense. C'est une avancée majeure, je tiens à le dire. Bien sûr, elle n'est pas encore à la dimension de ce que nous voyons aujourd'hui. Mais c'est une avancée majeure. 8 milliards d'euros qui vont générer, évidemment, 20, 30, peut-être 40 milliards, parce qu'évidemment, c'est de l'argent qu'on met pour générer des projets. On a un succès immense aujourd'hui. La première édition est un très grand succès. On a 63 projets qui ont été sélectionnés, 26 pays sur 27 qui y participent, 43% de PME dans des domaines très stratégiques. On ajoute évidemment dessus 1,7 milliard de military mobility, ça fait 8,7 milliards. Je ne compte pas évidemment la Peace Facility qui est de 5,2 milliards. Donc on commence enfin à avoir un budget mutualisé pour travailler ensemble en amont et en aval. Je dis en aval aussi parce que vous savez que maintenant avec EDIRPA, donc avec le projet que nous avons d'acheter des munitions en commun, et bien ça va évidemment accroître nos capacités. Donc je voudrais d'abord signaler que bien sûr c'est pas aujourd'hui assez, mais l'Europe se construit en avançant. C'est un début et c'est comme ça qu'on crée finalement plus que notre stratégique autonomie, notre capacité à accroître nos dépendances. Aujourd'hui, on investit tous ensemble, on voit les chiffres, 200 milliards d'euros par an. Les États-Unis, c'est 800 milliards de dollars. Donc on voit bien qu'il y a un gap énorme, mais on voit aussi, et je tiens à le dire, qu'à l'heure où on est tous mobilisés pour réinvestir ensemble, tout simplement pour recomposer nos stocks, parce que nous avons été, évidemment, on a donné à l'Ukraine ce qu'elle nous demandait et ce que nous avions. Tous les pays du monde, y compris les États-Unis, vous avez vu les dernières déclarations, n'ont plus assez de stocks. Donc on rentre dans une période, vous avez vu les dernières déclarations en particulier en Amérique, mais c'est vrai aussi pour nous. Donc c'est la raison pour laquelle nous voulons profiter, et ça va faire peut-être une transition avec mon voisin, nous voulons profiter, si je puis dire, pardon de cette expression, je la mets entre guillemets, avec des triples guillemets, de cette situation pour accroître notre capacité de défense européenne, d'industrie de défense européenne, lui donner de la profondeur, de la visibilité, parce qu'on ne pourra pas, et je le dis très clairement, par rapport aux demandes, dépendre des autres. Il faut qu'on augmente très vite nos propres ressources pour pouvoir répondre à ces besoins. Et c'est donc EDIRPA, et c'est peut-être une bonne transition pour donner la parole à mon voisin, mais je ne vais pas me substituer à vous.
Thank you. You're still in my job. But just let me stay with you for a second. In reading the tea leaves of Commissioner von der Leyen's keynote speech, it seems that we're gearing up for a revision of the budget, which will give somewhat more importance to defense. The how much and the where is yet to be determined by you and your colleagues. But when you mentioned EDIPRA, so the short-term joint purchasing mechanism for ammunition and other defense equipment, when it was presented, there was the feeling, the understanding that this was just the beginning, so 500 million in the 2022-2024 stage. Would you advocate in college with your colleagues for a boosting of EDIPRA in the next revision?
Of course, and I want to come back on the EDIPRA. EDIPRA is a pilot, exactly the way we worked for the defense fund. Remember, where we worked in the previous Commission view, we had a pilot. It was exactly the same amount, 500 million euros. So we copy what we have done for the fund successfully. So now that's a pilot. We hope to be able to put it very quickly, of course, in the end of the Parliament and in the end of the Council, and to have a final approval as soon as possible, because we need, again, to work and to increase our capacity to produce this equipment as soon as possible. And then, of course, next year, if the pilot is working, and I have no doubt that it will work, then, of course, propose something much bigger, much more important, like we did for the Defence Fund.
Thank you for that. Let's turn to you, Deputy Secretary General. So I was going to ask more or less the same. Where are we at in terms of Europe's defense capabilities? We know that this week at your headquarters there will be meetings of top defense officials to discuss, do we really need to ramp up production, and if so, of what and where? Because by sending our armaments to Ukraine, some countries are running low on stock. So can you give us a sense of what is NATO's message to defense ministries and to the industry when it comes to what you need to produce and when?
No, thank you so much for inviting me. If I can translate in political language what I heard from President von der Leyen, from Commissioner Hahn, from Commissioner Breton, the time has come for us to, all of us, to put our budgets where our mouth is. There's no escape. And this brutal awakening, ce réveil brutal que la guerre que la Russie a déclenché contre l'Ukraine, this is having impact. And we are just at the beginning of the lessons learned and the implications of this systemic shock that will impact European security architecture, and not only, also economic, energy, but also will impact the new world order. So my plea to a European Union audience, and because Secretary General Stoltenberg asked me, because I'm coming from Romania, a EU country as well, I care about the EU and I care about NATO-EU. Speaking of numbers, before answering your question, today we have 600 million, almost 600 million European citizens living in NATO countries. Today we have, with Finland and Sweden joining us soon, we'll have 96% of EU citizens living in a NATO country. And speaking of numbers, and I hope this will improve, Commissioner Breton is right. You just cannot continue to pretend that the world has not changed. It did. That today EU member states contribute to the NATO aggregated budget with 20%. 80% is the rest of the allies. So I think the term here should be strategic solidarity, because we don't have enough resources separately. We need to make better use of what we invest in defense, in economy, in energy, in everything we need to do, microprocessors, in a way that will be convergent and not divergent. Because also the economic balance of power is shifting away from Europe and Euro-Atlantic space towards Asia, and not only China, the rest of these nations. So we have to be very, very attentive in making sure that we respect each other's ambitions, which is absolutely normal, but we do it in a way that will be convergent. Of course, as you mentioned, and I'm very happy to have Chairman Profumo, whom I respect and know for many years. We have seen an unprecedented unity across what I call the democratic political West. The meetings that are done outside of NATO in the Rammstein process, there are 44 nations, 44, helping Ukraine win this war. 44. We are only 32, soon to be, in NATO. The others are our partners from all over the world. We call the Rammstein process. NATO is doing its job in trying to help non-lethal aid Ukraine. EU has done remarkable things for Ukraine. We should be proud of that. It's unprecedented what the EU has done, and this is something we strongly encourage. But speaking of the other problem, which is political unity is still here with us. We hope that our democratic societies will be resilient enough to sustain the effort. But the other thing is that we don't have enough industrial capacity to fulfill our own needs as NATO and probably EU member states as well. And also that we don't have predictability for the industry to ramp up production. If I would be a CEO of a large, military/technological company, I would look into the example of COVID-19. And this was a spike of need for vaccines, everything else, and then things went flat. They need predictability. This is where NATO can help and is helping. So when you have in NATO the investment pledge and the NATO defense planning process, this is where you can have from 32 nations, with all the budgets, predictability where you need to invest. And then, of course, each of the EU member states can do its part. I would plead against this audience. Do not try to create artificial divergences in this process that will help industry. If Mr. Profumo would like to build new capacities or try to hire fresh people to go to a bank eventually and get some credits, they need predictability, and this is NATO can offer. This is also helping EU indirectly to avoid the fragmentation, which is immense in Europe. So we have to give industry predictability, including some things that were raised to Secretary General by President Draghi when we were in Rome just a few months back, and said, listen, they're also a part of the financial sector, pension funds and others that do not want to invest in defense because it's politically sensitive. So you have to do an effort to convince not only the financial sector but also the others to be doing that. I don't know how much the active poll will be looking into this. I say to close this thing, we have just one set of forces, EU or NATO or anything in between. Any country from France to Germany to the UK to Turkey to America to Canada to everyone else. We have just one set of forces. We have one defense budget, not two, not five. So the best thing for us, the wise thing to do, and also to put our budgets where our mouth is to make sure that we keep this unique partnership between NATO and EU closer than ever. Try to avoid the temptation to use this complex moment to go divergent. We don't have the luxury and the resources to go alone. Neither Europe alone can defend Europe, North America alone cannot defend Europe. We need both Europe and North America together in defending Europe. And this is something that's a reality. If you want, it's a law of geostrategic gravity. And that's, I think, an encouragement coming from my side and from our side in NATO. The unique partnership between NATO and EU should be strengthened. We should do more things together. We should try to be probably closer than ever before in our long history. And this is the message coming from the other side of the city.
Thank you for that. And we turn finally to Mr. Profumo. Thanks for waiting. I think that the question here is clear, which is what does industry need in terms of its discussions with the EU, with NATO, and with national politicians, national ministries of defense. Since the beginning of the war, over 6 months ago, what have you received as a message and what have you sent back?
First of all, many thanks for having invited me. I think that it's important to have the industrial presence as well in this conference. I fully share what has been said. We need a very strong coordination between NATO and Europe. I think that we need a strong industrial base in Europe. In order to have a strong industrial base in Europe, we need what has just been said, a predictability of what will happen. So if we have to increase our production capability, and we are more than ready to do so, we cannot produce for our warehouse, so we need orders in order to have a predictable demand for what we will produce in the near future. But we need as well that there will be a strong European procurement. We have to be open on that. because if all the countries, as has been said, will go up to 2% or even higher in terms of defense expenditure, in the next 10 years there will be an additional European expenditure of 600 billion euros. If this 600 billion euros, and 10 years is a very short period of time, will be procured outside of Europe, we know that we will close the European market for at least 25 years, because any platform has a long-term life for itself. And this would mean that the European industry will be weakened. If the European industry will be weakened, we will not have technological capabilities, so that at the end we will not be capable as Europe. I fully share what Commissioner Breton said on strategic autonomy. For me, strategic autonomy is to maintain in Europe technological capability. Without that, we don't have defense, and this is the only political piece of my intervention. Without a European defense, we will never be a political subject as Europe, in my opinion. But again, maybe I'm wrong, but unfortunately I'm too old in order not to have a strong conviction on that. So we need a European defense capability, fully coordinated with NATO and with the transatlantic capability. But without a technological base, we won't have that. So what I think is important is not only to spend more, but also to spend better. And in order to spend better, we have to coordinate the requisite of our defense system. Because today, for instance, we have a fantastic helicopter, an NH-90. In theory, this is a NATO helicopter supported by different nations. Each of the countries do have a different helicopters. So it's a common platform, but the national needs, the national requisites are so different that we have differentiated the platform. And the cost goes up, the maintenance afterwards is more costly, so we need a stronger coordination in terms of requisite. From that will come the industrial coordination. So I think that this is very important. Europe can, and the European Union can push a lot in this perspective. In order really to have a strong coordination within the different defense systems, so that we will be capable to provide the same platform for any country. And then I will close. We need as well an European technological map, in my opinion, because each of the countries quite clearly want to keep something in its own country. We do have capabilities. We have to coordinate these capabilities, saying France is strong in this, Germany is strong in that, Italy is strong in that else. We need, and I know that there are different points of view, UK in the same picture, because from this Ukrainian war, what we are learning is the fact that UK is in Europe in terms of defense, because at the end the threats are exactly the same. And we have always to remember that UK is spending 1/5 of the European budget in defense. So I think it's important to keep UK strongly coordinated with us in the NATO framework. So I think that all these things are what we need, and the European industry is fully ready to be in this picture.
Thank you. I am aware that we're short of time, so I'm going to collect 2 questions from the audience, and my prayer is to not have statements but actual questions and to keep them short so we can give the floor as often as possible. Raise your hand if you want to put one up. You're so shy this morning. Okay, well, I'm going to then go and take the chance to ask you one myself. You have all touched upon it, the political sustainability of the current unity. So in the country where you come from, Mr. Profumo, and myself, there is a debate of whether arming Ukraine is the right way to go forward. And this debate has its own declinations across different countries. So maybe going to Raza, how is the European Parliament dealing with the question as a democratic institution of the EU? What will you, as an MEP, try to achieve in terms of unity? And please speak in Lithuanian if you wish.
On EU goals?
So far, as we have seen and heard, there is unity in response, and the issue will be whether our populations will understand that the hardship that they're experiencing as a result of sanctions, as a result of Putin's invasion of Russia and the economic blowback that this is causing, will somehow undermine the joint efforts that are happening also on the military level from Europe towards Ukraine.
Okay, pabandysiu. Taip, tai, kas dabar vyksta, ir net šios konferencijos metu sunku atsitraukti nuo pranešimo apie tai, kas vyksta šiuo metu Kijeve ir Ukrainoje. Sakyčiau, kad Putinas treniravosi Sirijoje, dabar bando taip pat sunaikinti ukrainiečius. Ir čia labai svarbu, ar mūsų vienodas yra vertinimas situacijos. Kaip jūs sakot, Italijoje ir Lietuvoje, mano šaly. Manau, kad nelabai, nors Europos parlamente mes iš tikrųjų pasižymim didžiulę vienybę, priimdami rezoliuciją, savo nuomonę dėl Rusijos. Bet šiandien šį pirmadienį atėjo kitas etapas ir mano mintis čia prieš jūs yra, kai kam pasirodys labai radikalios, bet aš manau, kad atėjo laikas įsitraukti tiesiogiai NATO, bent jau NATO valstybių koalicijoms, kad sustabdytumėm šitą genocidą. Bijau, kad taip gali neatsitikti, tokio sprendimo nebūti, nes yra daug, Putinas žaidžia baimėmis. Ir keista, bet pavyzdžiui, mano šalies arba mano regiono žmonės mažiau bijo gąsdinimų branduolinių ginklų, nors tai mums galbūt tiesiogiai labiau gresia, negu kad žmonės Italijoje, Prancūzijoje ir kur nors kitur. Ir va čia mes susidurėm dabar su politinė valia, su, aišku, visų pirma, Jungtinių Amerikos valstijų, Didžiosios Britanijos, tų valstybių, kurios turi galę, vis dėlto pabandyti nebijoti visų pirma, neišsigąsti, nes jeigu mes išsigasim, tai iš tikrųjų Ukrainos neliks, aišku, Ukraina liks, Ukraina kovos ir tai tik tai dar ilgiau užtruks viskas. Tai sprendimų reikia šiandien, dabar, šiomis minutėmis. Ir čia yra ir mūsų vakarų išbandymas. Jeigu atėjom ginti Serebrinicoje žudomų žmonių, tai privalom ateiti dar labiau padėti ginti ir žmonių, ukrainiečių, tokių pat kaip mes, kurie vis dėlto net ir matant tai, kas šiandien vyksta, aš tikiu, kad jie bus mūsų šeimos dalimi ir įneš didžiulį indėlį į mūsų visų saugumą. Tai, kad mes šiandien nesam žudomi, pirmiausia, mano šalies žmonės nesam žudomi, aš visų pirma dėkinga, aišku, ukrainiečiam. Nes jeigu Ukraina būtų pralaimėjusi per 3 dienas ar savaitę, kaip Putinas planavo, įsivaizduokit, kokiom aplinkybėm mes šiandien būtumėm svarstę savo saugumo situaciją ir savo ES ateitį.
Thank you for that. You wanted to come back.
No, just one word, I think, regarding your question, and maybe to give four 3 short comments to your statements. First, it's absolutely true. We are committed, together with our fellow citizens, to make huge efforts. So the first thing, we all know that we need to increase our capacity to produce more. In the US, in UK, and of course in Europe. So the first thing, our fellow citizens will understand that we will increase a lot. By the way, the figures, when you take the difference between now and the 2%, is not 600 billion, it's 163 billion per year. So it means that an average is probably over 1 trillion for the next 10 years. No, but okay, but I think that this amount is huge. So now the question for our fellow citizens, will this money will be used for our industry, our jobs, our, you call it strategic autonomy, the way you want, or will we use it to buy outside? That's a big question. And if we come to our fellow citizens and say, look, we will put 1 trillion, but it will be, of course, benefiting other industry, then you're right, maybe shaky. The second point, we are in a very urgent mood. The war is here, you repeat, and that's very important. That's why, by the way, I hope that the European Parliament will support very quickly this idea that we need to buy ammunition collectively now, not in January or February or March. That's why we are really in an urgent call here. The third thing, we have the visibility. We know that we do this with our partners, with NATO. I remember that with President Trump 2 years ago, I remember what he was saying about NATO. So we need to make sure that we are strong, so that we will create an appetite, whatever could happen with our partners, to continue to have a strong alliance. And we know that we will have this very strong alliance as long as we will be strong ourselves. And of course for you, we have the visibility. You're absolutely right. We need to make sure that we can invest in defense industry. By the way, I can reassure you, there is no hidden agenda. The Commission will always support the fact that everyone who wants to invest in defense will do it, including, by the way, the EIB. So that I'm pushing. So there's no hidden agenda. Don't worry. I know that it's a legitimate concern that you have, but of course for us, we will favor any support because we need to enhance our defense industry, and that's a tool that we are building together. Thank you.
Unless the gentlemen have a comment. Please.
Oh yeah, I do. Number one, we spoke a lot about the systemic shock that the Russian war is producing on European soil and also in global affairs. I would like to broaden a little bit the picture and then to narrow down again. So, one, this systemic shock is part of a great power competition era which is back and is here to stay with us for many long years and probably decades. That's fundamentally a shift in world order. And for that, even if we add up all these numbers, and I think we should add up in a transatlantic way, and then, of course, each of the nations and each of the organizations, including the EU, and especially the EU, should do the utmost with the money that the taxpayers are investing. That's only normal. To defend your industry, to create better jobs, and to keep a certain edge in technology and innovation. That's absolutely normal. Nothing wrong with that. That's good. Competition is good. But we're also looking at NATO from a 360-degree perspective. Russia is the number one threat. The rise of China is a significant problem. But then we have the South, which is immensely unstable, which has a fragility that should be of concern to all of us. So a part of these resources, military, economic, aid, NATO-EU partnerships together, we do a few countries, we should do more together. We have to, in a way, invest in the countries to the south. Because the new old order will not be done only by the European Union or NATO or China or America, it will be done by many other regional players that are gaining in significance, and they are playing ball. They are playing the game. And we see this from the periphery of Russia all the way to Africa and Asia and Latin America as we speak. The third observation. We have to draw the right lessons from the war in Ukraine. In NATO, we are the first ones to say that we have predictability for investment. 2% will be the minimum and not the threshold. UK, which was mentioned, is moving toward 3% of GDP. 3% of GDP for defense, and I think that most of the EU member states that are not yet there, I think will be there pretty soon, not only Germany, but others. I'm not one to mention names here, so this will be done. But the real thing behind this military conversation we have now is the technological edge. That's the real competition. I chair the Innovation Board in NATO. I run cyber adaptation in NATO. I chair the Resilience Committee in NATO. So we have to make sure we find the right balance between let's say, more conventional capabilities that the lessons learned from Ukraine are teaching all of us, but also invest in the new things that will be driving warfare and security and economy in the years to come. Microchips, I salute the fact that President von der Leyen announced in the State of the Union speech this Microchips Act. That's normal for the EU to try to have something and not having everything elsewhere rather than here. But speaking of innovation capabilities, we have to find the right balance between what the EU does and what NATO countries do in terms of innovation, respecting fully the idea that it has to be competition, because today 90% of the innovation that is used in defense is produced by the private sector and academia. 90%, 90%. For space technology, for quantum technology, for biotech technology, for everything that will be at the intersection between infotech and biotech, that will be the revolution in world affairs and our economies in the years to come. So I leave this question again in this EU-dominated audience. I'm a EU member myself as a citizen, as my beliefs. We have to find the smart way to do number one, to use this tragic war and use the fact that our young generation, and this is the year of the youth in the EU, that's great. I was at Sciences Po just a few weeks back, and I was really shocked by the emotion and solidarity that the young generation in the West, not in Lithuania or Romania or Poland or Estonia, but in the West, were looking to this brutal, barbaric war that Russia has waged against innocent Ukraine. So we have to make sure that we have strategic culture which is more homogeneous. Commissioner Breton is right. It's one thing to look at this war from a, let's say, Italian or Spanish perspective, another one from a Polish or Romanian perspective, but I think this war can help us do this. So my second comment is, look not only from this Eurocentric view of the world is much broader. And don't do it even from a Euro-Atlantic or transatlantic perspective, because the world is much broader. And the innovation, for the first time in 5 centuries, the West, as we know it, has a competitor, which is China, which is formidable. And is making advances in some fields that will be critical for the future of our economies, of warfare and security at the same time. So I don't want to be in Commissioner Breton's shoes to balance this thing, but I think we should find a way to strengthen Europe, to keep the transatlantic bond strong, and be able to compete in the world, which is dramatically changing with a speed like we have never seen in history ever before. So we need both. We need each other more than ever. That's my commercial pitch at the end.
Thank you. I'm aware of short time, so I wanted to give the audience a chance. There's one person there, and then we'll pass to Slido. Thank you. Can you say your name and where you're from, please? And use the mic, please. Yeah.
Hello? Sorry. I'm Nemanja, I'm from Vienna. I have one question. So you said a 600 billion budget is for security and defense. Is this also is this only for buying arms, or is there also a vision for a peace program? For example, you say my English is not so good. So you said that we want to invest in our mouth, yeah, to the budget, yeah. Is there also a vision for conflict management, not only with arms, so that the problems can be solved in a peaceful way? And do we have to be concerned about the new war?
Okay, I think you're addressing it to Deputy Secretary General of NATO, right?
Yes.
Okay, a short response, if we may.
Listen, I mentioned that we need strong defense, and we also need to invest in peace, stability, and security all around us. So yes, in NATO, speaking of putting our mouth where our budget is, or the other way around, we are investing and we are helping allies to make sure that they invest the right amount in the right kind of defense-related technologies and capabilities, but we also do a lot in terms of strengthening resilience of our neighbors, investing in helping them fight terrorism, which remains a huge problem all the way from Afghanistan to the Gulf of Guinea. That's an immense swath of land that is very complicated. And here I say that NATO and EU together, in terms of our partnerships, especially to the south, we mentioned about Ukraine, Moldova, all the others, but here to the south, and in Africa in general, we have to do a much better job. And a portion of this money should be, all right, should be also invested in stabilizing our neighborhoods that are so fragile. And that's a matter of huge concern in NATO. Of course, Russia, China, but this is important. So you're right. A portion of that money should be also invested in things that will strengthen resilience and state capacity to withstand terrorism and other threats coming from the south, including climate change and security, by the way, which is becoming a huge problem. And that's also NATO is engaged in climate change and security quite a bit with our partners to the south.
There's a lot of questions on Slido about what we can expect from the next EU budget. We know that Commissioner Breton is looking to increase at least EDIPRA, so the short-term joint procurement. But perhaps a bigger question. There is some limits to what the EU budget can and can do when it comes to defense. Is there a need to review that?
But I think, and it will be maybe a bridge with the previous question. In fact, I say that if we are all together at 2%, and I agree with you, we should be above. By the way, Poland will be much higher than that, as you know. So we have already some member states coming higher. So we will generate, when we will be all of us at 2%, which I hope will be as soon as possible, we'll generate an additional 163 billion euros in defense spending per year. So it means that part of it, of course, will be for, let's say, infrastructure, munitions, tools. Part of it will be, of course, for also forces. So it's yet, of course, difficult to tell you what is balanced, but the biggest part, of course, will be for equipment and everything that we need. This is why it will give us a pretty strong visibility. But today, in order to make this more efficient, we need to act and buy and work together. It was a commitment from the member states to, let's say, to purchase and to work together for 35% of the investment and equipment. Today we are at 9%. So there's a lot of progresses that we can make to make this huge amount that we will have for our European defense, to make us stronger. By the way, hopefully the strongest partner in NATO. This is what we hoped. We need to be very strong to be a strong partner in NATO. So we have here the tool, but of course we need to work more closely together. That's why, again, this EDIPRA and EDIP that we are working in is definitely a tool to get used to buy together. We are now used to work together for R&D or advanced R&D. By the way, we do this also for CHIP Act. You are right. We have been the first one to put the CHIP Act on the table with President von der Leyen. That's something like 42 billion euros that we will invest together here. And a big part of R&D to be definitely able to produce leading-edge technologies. And in FinFET technologies for microchips is below 2 nanometers. So that's really what we need, and especially for this equipment, but also in quantum, but also in cybersecurity, but also in everything. So that's raw materials, by the way, because we need also a lot of raw materials, and especially in defense, we all know that. So we have the tools, but let's work together.
Thank you. And we'll end on that note because I'm aware we're running late. There's a lot of interesting questions on Slido. I suggest you take that during your coffee break and approach our speakers, if you may. And
well, I actually have them all here, Paola, so I'm going to read a couple of them out. It's worth noting that some people are discussing a lot of questions regarding hard versus soft power. I think that's inevitable, as well as questioning whether we're back to a Cold War-style stalemate. If I'm to group all those remaining questions into two, I think they could be defined as where might increased defence spending in the 2023 MFF review go, and what might be alternative sources of funds. So the first question there is people are asking about whether it might be the EU Defence Technological and Industrial Base or the European Defence Fund. Another question is, should the EU budget finance a European pillar within NATO, and what might that look like? I'll let Paola choose who wants to answer that one. And for the second element, the question is, could frozen Russian assets be perhaps used to fund reconstruction of Ukraine or defence? And could European firms manufacturing weapons that have increased their profit margins since the war be asked to contribute more to a European budget? Some loaded questions there, but I'll let you pick your speakers.
think, Mr. Profumo, if you wanted to add to the last one, perhaps.
I want to say one word on export, because we have to know that the European defense industry cannot survive only with European procurement. So we need a system in order to be sure that if we have a joint program, no one can block the export of this joint program. Unless we will never have an industrial coordination, because each of the countries want to keep the production within its own country in order to be sure that this country can export. So we need an European system in order to have an export license. I don't think that this is something that can be done by the EU Commission. For instance, the agreement has been done by Germany, France and Spain for the FCAS, I think, is very interesting. So we have to find a way in order to be sure that we have common programs and then we can export together.
The sort of Airbus of the defense sector.
One thing is Airbus, because this is a production. Another story is the license in order to export the Meteor missile, for instance. So it's something on which we have to work really at the European level.
Thank you.
I didn't mention one magic word, which is interoperability. Interoperability. We'll invest more, but we have to make sure that we'll be able to fight together and do things together. And of course, I understand why the European industry, mainly in the western part of the continent, is so concerned of not having everything bought from others. I'm also expressing the voice of the eastern part of the EU and NATO that should also be part of this effort. Because they say, okay, I have to buy between EU or American or Canadian or British things. So let's find a way to make sure that there is more distributed wealth and technology diffusion and investment also with the other countries that are investing a lot in defense. The second thing is about the fact that exports worldwide will be much better for the Euro-Atlantic community. Why? Because the reputation of Russia in terms of producer of high-end equipment is collapsing as we speak. It's collapsing as we speak. If I'm not in the position to run a country from the third outside of the Euro-Atlantic area where we have to buy from us, I would not buy Russian high-end, so-called high-end equipment which is so debilitated by a smaller nation in a fight with them. So I think there is room for more distributed wealth across European continent, interoperability, and also massive export opportunities for our industries. And that will be good for everyone. It's win, 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 and also bringing back to the budgets for other needs of our societies more money to the budgets to do also the other things on social, on technological or environmental needs that we have. So I think we should use this moment of change in keeping us together and making sure that we invest the money that will also have return on investment, not only for the defense industry, but also for our citizens in the end.